The billionaire had invited the black cleaning woman to the gala as a joke. She appeared like a queen, and every last guest was utterly stunned when they learned who she really was. The grand foyer of the Bennett mansion in Beverly Hills erupted in cruel laughter as Ava Coleman descended the marble staircase, wearing a gown more expensive than most people in the room earned in a year. Their laughter wasn't admiration, it was vicious mockery. "Look who dared to show up," Jonathan Bennett whispered to his guests, hoisting a glass of Dom Perignon. "Our dear little maid." At 35, Ava had never imagined she'd one day step into that ballroom as anything other than invisible help, even if only for a cruel prank. For 2 long years, she'd dusted and polished every corner of this estate. Always unseen. Always silent. She'd watch the wealthy fawn over each other with false smiles, then treat her like an object. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, handed to her with that familiar sneer. "Charity gala this Saturday," Jonathan had said, pressing a golden envelope into her hand. "Dress code, ultra formal. I'm sure you've got something suitable in your closet." His friend's laughter echoed down the hallway. It was obviously a setup, a public humiliation orchestrated for California's high society. Jonathan had even invited reporters to capture this educational event. "Want to bet?" Jonathan murmured to his wife, Emily, while Ava vacuumed the day before. 100,000, she replied, her eyes flashing cruelty. "She won't dare show. And if she does, it'll be the best entertainment of the night." Emily chuckled, delighting in his wickedness. "You're so evil, Jonathan. She'll have to borrow a dress from someone, and you'll see her run for the door within 10 minutes. But Jonathan Bennett didn't know 2 crucial things about Ava Coleman. First, she'd grown up in grand halls just like this one, long before she'd ever been forced to clean them to survive. Second, some storms can't break a person, they only teach them how to rise stronger. Ava accepted the golden invitation with astonishing calm, her resolute eyes betraying no doubt. "I'll be there," she said softly. And in that moment, the mocking smile on Jonathan's face flickered and died. He quickly reclaimed his composure, confident she couldn't possibly withstand the pressure of his elite circle. What he didn't know was that Ava had been meticulously preparing for this fateful night. She understood that this was her one chance to bring the painful truths of the past into the light, the truths Jonathan had buried for 20 years. Behind Ava's serene exterior lay a bold plan, ready to turn his cruel joke into his irrevocable downfall. When Ava stepped into that grand hall on Saturday evening, she would be far more than a cleaning woman. She would stand up for justice and force everyone to see the grave mistake they'd made in underestimating her. On Saturday evening, the crystal chandeliers in the Bennett mansion's grand hall blazed like stars, their light dancing across the gleaming marble floor. The city's elite began to arrive in their lavish attire, smiles polished to perfection even as their eyes silently sized each other up. Jonathan Bennett stood beside his wife Emily, a fine wine glass in hand and a glint of cruel excitement in his gaze. Emily touched his shoulder and whispered, her tone icy and mocking, "Do you think she'll actually come, or did she get cold feet?" Jonathan let out a sneering laugh, pride swelling in his chest. "Someone like her can't resist the chance to step into this world, even if it's just to be humiliated. Trust me, she'll be here." At that moment, a soft footstep echoed from the top of the staircase. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The air turned thick with anticipation. Then Ava Coleman appeared, descending the stairs as if she were on the most elegant runway. Her floor-length emerald gown exuded grace and sophistication far beyond anything the guests expected of her. Long curls were swept into an artful updo, and delicate diamond earrings caught the light, illuminating her face. Ava moved with slow, measured steps, composed, yet commanding. Her heart pounded fiercely, though she showed no sign of fear. But the moment the crowd recognized her, polite smiles melted into open derision. A sharp laugh rang out, followed by a chorus of malicious gasps. "Oh my God, look at her! How pathetic!" exclaimed a blonde woman. "She must have spent an entire month's wages on that dress," sneered a middle-aged man. Jonathan turned to Emily, delight flashing in his eyes at Ava's discomfort. Emily offered a soft, cruel smile. "Give it a few minutes. She won't last. What surprised Jonathan most was Ava's serene confidence. She did not falter under their jeers. Instead, she continued down the stairs with pride and resolve, her gaze fixed on Jonathan as if sending him a silent warning. A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. His smug smile stiffened. Doubt flickered in his mind, but his arrogance quickly banished it. She's putting on an act of strength, he muttered to himself, struggling to steady his voice. She'll realize where she belongs soon enough. Emily glanced at Ava, noting the calm determination in her stance. Her brow furrowed. Something's off, Jonathan. She's too composed. Jonathan merely smirked. Just wait. Neither of them knew that Ava Coleman was no easy prey. She had spent her life waiting for this moment. Their mocking laughter could no longer hurt her, she had endured far deeper wounds. Each step Ava took down the staircase was a silent declaration of her inner strength. Behind her elegant poise lay a meticulously crafted plan, ready to unfold. Ava approached Jonathan and Emily and offered a gracious, enigmatic smile. Halting before Jonathan, she dipped into a polite curtsy, her eyes sharp enough to pierce his soul. "Thank you for inviting me tonight, Mr. Bennett," she said softly. "It truly is a wonderful opportunity for us all to understand one another better." Jonathan's frown deepened. Ava's words carried an unseen weight he couldn't decipher. Before he could respond, she glided away into the crowd, leaving Jonathan and Emily in a sudden fog of confusion. Guests still whispered, but their mocking laughter had given way to hesitant murmurs. No one could fathom how she remained so unshaken. Jonathan stood rooted to the spot, his wine glass trembling ever so slightly. What he had intended as a cruel evening's amusement had transformed into an unpredictable event, one that left his heart drumming with unease. What he didn't know was that tonight would not be the night Ava Coleman fled in shame. On the contrary, it would mark the beginning of her grand design, one she had prepared for years to upend Jonathan Bennett's life and turn the ruthless hunter into the hunted. Under the watchful eyes of Beverly Hills high society, amid the curious, skeptical stares of the guests, Ava Coleman drifted through the crowd as if she had belonged here forever. Her calm demeanor unsettled not only Jonathan and Emily, but sent quiet murmurs rippling around the room. Yet no one knew that beneath that serene exterior, painful memories were awakening, driving Ava forward with greater resolve than ever before. In a secluded corner of the grand hall, Ava paused beside an antique table. Her finger instinctively traced the edge of the exquisite diamond ring on her hand, a family heirloom set with a finely carved blue gemstone. The long-concealed emblem of the prestigious Bennett lineage. An emblem Jonathan had spent years trying to erase from everyone's memory. None of these high society guests suspected that Ava Coleman was no ordinary maid. Before her life had been swallowed by darkness, she had been a member of this very wealthy family. Her father, Edward Bennett, had been the true power behind the vast fortune that Jonathan now inherited. More than 20 years ago, Ava had danced joyfully down these very corridors. Small footsteps echoing alongside her innocent laughter and her father's adoring smile. But that perfect existence shattered the day he died under mysterious circumstances. On that fateful day, Jonathan, her older half-brother, stepped into her life like a cruel shadow. Driven by boundless greed, he was determined to obliterate every trace of Ava's true connection to the Bennett name. He stripped her of everything, wealth, status, even the cherished memories of her happier past. She and her mother were cast out into poverty and disgrace. The ring Ava wore was her father's final gift, the last reminder of her real identity. For 20 years, she had guarded it like a precious secret, quietly awaiting the right moment to expose the truth Jonathan had so desperately hidden. Her emerald ball gown was no random choice either. It was the very dress her mother had worn to that last fateful gala as the head of the Bennett household, a woman Jonathan had driven from this life of privilege, forcing her to endure society's cruelty until her dying breath. Every stitch in the gown reminded Ava of those deep wounds, and of the weighty responsibility she bore. Such a beautiful dress. She must have borrowed it for life, right? A mocking voice cut through her thoughts. Ava turned to see Cynthia Evans, the senator's wife, who always looked down on her whenever she came to the mansion. Ava offered a slight smile, her eyes flashing with a cold intensity Cynthia had never seen before. Thank you for noticing, Mrs. Evans. Actually, this gown has a very special history, one I think would surprise you greatly. Cynthia frowned in confusion, unsettled by Ava's unfamiliar confidence. A special history? What history could a cheap dress possibly have? Ava's smile never wavered. Her reply was gentle, yet as sharp as a blade. Sometimes the most important chapters of a family's history rest in the hands of those everyone dismisses. You do well to remember that, because soon, you'll need to understand it fully. Cynthia took an involuntary step back, unnerved by the ominous promise in Ava's tone. She quickly spun away and melted back into the crowd, her heart thundering with apprehension. Across the room, Jonathan and Emily watched the brief exchange with growing discomfort. Emily leaned toward her husband, her voice uncharacteristically uneasy. Jonathan, what is she planning? She's far too composed. Far too odd. Jonathan shook his head, clinging to his arrogance for reassurance. It's just a performance. Ava has nothing. She's merely trying to make us uneasy. But she'll never prove a thing. Though Jonathan spoke with confidence, a deeper anxiety was stirring within him. The memories and truths he had labored to bury for decades were beginning to resurface, cornering him in a darkness he dared not confront. From her vantage point, Ava watched him and the assembled guests with serene intensity. She knew that these people, those who thought themselves so superior, had no idea of the real past she held in her hand. Now, she was ready to bring to light the darkest secrets, secrets powerful enough to plunge Jonathan into the depths of despair and make him pay for the years of pain he'd inflicted on her and her mother. And Ava Coleman understood that this fateful night was only just beginning. From the shadowed corner where Ava stood, her gaze remained serene as she watched Jonathan struggle to conceal the growing unease within him. Noticing the brief flicker of hesitation on his face, Emily gently squeezed Jonathan's hand as if to steady him, whispering in agitation, "Are you really going to let her derail our party? You need to do something right now." Jonathan curled the corner of his mouth in a forced smile, his voice chillingly sharp, yet betraying his instability. "Don't worry, Emily. Let's see how long she can keep up that calm facade." With that, Jonathan strode toward Ava, brimming with counterfeit confidence, his wealthy cronies always eager to join in. His cruelties flanked him like hyenas circling their prey. "Ava, that dress is beautiful," Jonathan mocked, dragging out the words for maximum derision. "I never imagined someone earning your salary could afford such finery." His friends burst into laughter. Michael Hayes, a towering middle-aged investment fund manager, chimed in. "Do you think she spent her entire life savings on that dress? Now that's dedication." Their cruel eyes locked onto Ava, waiting for her to crumble under their taunts. But to their surprise, she did not flinch. Ava turned slowly, meeting Jonathan's gaze with frightening calm, a subtle, knowing smile playing at her lips. "Thank you, Jonathan, and everyone, for your concern. But you see, the true value of a dress isn't measured by its price tag but by the story it carries. And believe me, this gown has a story you couldn't possibly imagine." Jonathan stiffened at her reply. He had never seen Ava so composed, especially in front of such a powerful crowd. Her icy confidence felt like an invisible hand tightening around his heart. Martha Sullivan, a distinguished owner of a premier California hotel chain, stepped forward with a sarcastic edge, attempting to regain control. "Oh dear Ava, you speak as if you've lived in our world. What could you possibly know about luxury or the grand stories of high society?" Ava faced Martha with unshaken poise, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Oh, I understand it well, Mrs. Sullivan. Sometimes those who think they know everything are the ones who know nothing about the very people standing right in front of them, like Jonathan Bennett here." Ava's words struck Jonathan's pride like a fist. He forced himself to reply, voice trembling with thinly veiled rage. "What are you insinuating, Ava?" She tilted her head slightly. Her mysterious smile made hearts flutter with a mix of curiosity and dread. "I'm not insinuating anything, Jonathan. I'm merely speaking the truth, a truth I believe you know all too well." Silence fell instantly. The earlier laughter vanished, replaced by a stifling hush. Guests murmured among themselves, bewildered that a woman they had dismissed as insignificant could remain so unruffled. Across the room, Emily's face drained of color as she watched her husband unravel. For the first time, she saw Jonathan lose control, a man renowned for his icy power. She moved to his side, gripping his arm and whispering in a shaky voice, "Jonathan, are you all right? I think we should end this before it goes too far." Jonathan shook off her hand, his tone brusque but laced with hidden panic. "She's only trying to intimidate us. There's no way Ava has anything on us." Even as he spoke, an unsettling realization gripped him. The dangerous game he had set in motion was spiraling beyond his control. Across the glittering hall, Ava stood proud and composed, her eyes gleaming under the crystal lights, harboring a secret potent enough to shatter the world he had meticulously built. What had begun as Jonathan and his circle's malicious taunt was now igniting a panic none of them could explain. Amid the crowd's startled, curious stares, Ava Coleman raised her glass of wine to her lips and took a measured sip. She knew this was Jonathan's game, but she would be the one to finish it. And everyone here, those who had laughed and looked down on her, would soon realize they had poked at a secret powerful enough to shake their tiny world to its core. Amid the suffocating silence that had fallen over the room, Ava slowly set her wine glass on the table, her eyes still locked on Jonathan. Her expression was calm, but beneath that serenity lay a power that only deepened his unease. Jonathan forced himself to hold on to whatever shred of composure he had left. But in the back of his mind, a small, insistent voice reminded him that his worst fear was coming true. A low murmur of gossip began to ripple through the guests like restless waves. Curiosity and confusion shone on their faces as they tried to make sense of Ava's mysterious composure. A few glances flickered toward Jonathan, as though they were waiting for him to offer an explanation. But he stood firm, even as turmoil churned beneath his facade. Ava drew in a steady breath, her face grave with resolve, and walked to the center of the room. The crystal lights above cast brilliant rays around her, turning the moment almost surreal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ava's voice rang out, clear and commanding enough to silence the entire hall. "I believe it's time you learned the truth that Jonathan Bennett here has spent the last 20 years hiding from you." Jonathan took an involuntary step forward, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "Ava, don't spout nonsense. What are you trying to pull?" Ava met his stare with unshakable calm, her eyes as cold and steady as steel. "This game, Jonathan, was started by you. But tonight, I will be the one to finish it." The guests held their breath, eyes riveted on Ava, hearts pounding with anticipation. Emily, pale as a ghost beside Jonathan, clenched her hands together as if searching for solid ground. Ava lifted her hand and slipped the heirloom ring from her finger, the exquisite jewel she'd guarded for so many years. She held it aloft, the deep blue gem sparkling like a beacon, and the guests gasped in stunned amazement. "You remember this ring, don't you, Jonathan?" Ava asked, her tone steady yet pressing. "The Bennett family heirloom. My father Edward Bennett's final gift to me before he passed." The room erupted in shocked whispers, the wave of astonishment crashing from guest to guest like an unstoppable tsunami. Jonathan's face drained of color. His breath grew shallow under the scrutiny of 100 questioning eyes. "Don't listen to her lies. It's a fraud," Jonathan shouted, trying to regain control. But the quaver in his voice betrayed his terror. Unfazed, Ava pressed on, each word a precise blow to his carefully constructed facade. "My name is Ava Coleman Bennett, Jonathan Bennett's half-sister. Right here in front of you, Jonathan erased every trace of me, of my mother, and of my childhood in this very house. But this ring is undeniable proof of Bennett blood running through my veins." Her declaration exploded like a bomb, sending the room into utter chaos. Those who had mocked her moments ago now stared in a mix of horror and awe. Emily swayed, her hand trembling as she reached for a nearby chair. She looked at her husband with eyes full of doubt and reproach. Jonathan felt himself thrown into the depths of despair, panic seizing him as he stared at the ring in Ava's hand. He tried to deny it, voice cracking. You dare bring a fake trinket here to slander me? You have no evidence beyond that worthless bauble? Ava offered a faint, knowing smile and stepped closer to Jonathan, locking eyes with him in a chilling act of certainty. Jonathan, you know whether this ring is real or not. You know if I'm speaking the truth. I've waited a long time for the chance to speak out about everything you've done, and tonight I will no longer stay silent. Jonathan stumbled back, his mind reeling. His worst nightmare had become reality. The guest's scrutinizing stares felt like invisible blades slicing through his pride and honor. He turned to Emily, his partner for so many years, only to see her regard him as if he were a stranger she'd never known. Jonathan, Emily whispered, her voice choked with pain and disappointment. Ava stood tall in the spotlight, her gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd. Remember this moment, she declared. Remember that secrets buried beneath a glittering surface will always claw their way back into the light. Tonight, I haven't come merely to reclaim my own dignity, but to expose the full truth about the man who deceived us all, Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan froze, utterly lost. The 20 years of lies he'd buried were erupting around him, pushing him to the brink of collapse. And Ava Coleman Bennett knew with unwavering certainty that her battle had only just begun. The air in the room was thick and icy, almost suffocating. Jonathan Bennett stood frozen, his eyes wide with panic, as if trapped in an inescapable nightmare. The crowd's suspicious, accusing stares bore into him more intensely with each passing second, making him feel as though he were sinking into the very mire he himself had created. Ava swept her gaze around the room, sensing the tension reach its peak. From her elegant clutch, she produced a small audio recorder, her eyes cold and resolute as she locked onto Jonathan. If you think I only brought this ring to prove my heritage, you're mistaken, Jonathan. It's taken me 20 years to prepare everything for this moment. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond but found himself speechless. Ava calmly pressed the record button. Immediately, a familiar voice echoed through the speaker, each word a dagger to the hearts of everyone present. Jonathan's own cold, emotionless voice rang out. Dr. Carter, you must list my father's cause of death as a heart attack. If you dare mention the arsenic levels in his blood, I promise you'll lose everything. Don't test me. The hall erupted in horrified gasps and murmurs. Jonathan staggered backward as if struck by a mortal blow, his face ashen, legs trembling. Emily clamped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock, staring at the man she had trusted without question. Jonathan's wealthy cronies hastily backed away, as though mere proximity to him now threatened to stain them with his terrible crime. Jonathan croaked. That's fake. Ava, you're framing me. But Ava's expression remained icy calm. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. Jonathan, I knew you'd say that. That's why I brought a witness you've threatened for years. At that moment, the grand doors swung open, and in walked Dr. Thomas Carter, the Bennett family physician for decades. Gaunt and silver-haired, his lined face bore the weight of long-suppressed guilt. He stepped firmly to the center of the room. Dr. Carter fixed Jonathan with a look of sorrow and reproach, his voice trembling, yet unmistakably honest. I kept this secret for 20 years, not because I wanted to, but because Jonathan threatened to destroy my career and my family if I spoke the truth. Jonathan shook his head in despair, as if denying the cruel reality unfolding. But Dr. Carter's next words landed like a final, devastating blow. Edward Bennett, father of Ava and Jonathan, did not die of a heart attack, as we reported. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic, poison I found in his blood. Jonathan forced me to falsify the death certificate to conceal this atrocity. Emily let out a horrifying scream, collapsing into the nearest chair. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her husband with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Jonathan, now a broken shadow of the proud man who once ruled elite society, muttered incoherently. No. I never meant, it got out of hand. I just wanted. Ava cut in, her voice as cold as steel. Money. Power. To get them, you murdered your own father, plunged my mother and me into destitution, and then watched us suffer for decades. Jonathan's eyes went blank. The guests recoiled as if he were cursed, avoiding him like the plague. He searched desperately for an ally, but found only looks of disgust and contempt. Ava stepped forward, her words a sharp whisper meant only for him. "Jonathan, your crime is clearly laid bare. The lies you build your life on have collapsed. Now you will face the consequences of your actions." Jonathan tried to steady himself, but his legs gave out. He slumped into the nearest chair, eyes vacant, despair etched into every line of his face. Standing tall before the stunned audience, Ava addressed them with unwavering authority. "Tonight, you have witnessed a terrible truth buried for 2 decades. Jonathan Bennett will answer for his crimes, and I, Ava Coleman Bennett, will see that justice is done." The room fell deathly silent, every eye fixed on Ava. No longer was she a meek cleaning woman, but a symbol of truth, resilience, and courage, the woman who had single-handedly exposed the darkest secret in the Bennett family's history. The air in the room felt thick and icy, nearly suffocating. Jonathan Bennett stood frozen, terror widening his eyes as though he'd been trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. The crowd's accusing, disbelieving stares bore into him ever more intensely, pulling him down into the dark mire of his own making. Ava paused and took a slow, steady breath, grief and fierce resolve flickering through her eyes. She knew that to see true justice done, she had to unburden the 20 years of suffering she'd carried inside. She scanned the guests, once quick to mock her, and saw shock and horror replace their earlier contempt. Then she spoke, her voice softer now, yet weighted with terrible strength. "Back when my father died, Jonathan didn't just poison him with arsenic. What he did afterward was far more cruel." Jonathan trembled, opening his mouth to protest, but Ava's unflinching gaze silenced him. "He seized every penny of the inheritance my father left for my mother and me. Jonathan Bennett forged the paperwork, stripped us of our legal rights, and turned everything that was ours into his own." Emily, still reeling from the earlier revelations, pressed a hand to her chest, tears brimming in her eyes as she searched her husband's face for denial. But Jonathan sat there, hollow-eyed and defeated, incapable of even a protest. Ava turned her gaze on Emily, her tone gentler but laced with deep, old sorrow. "Emily, do you know why I became the maid in the house where I was raised? Because Jonathan forced my mother and me into utter destitution. We were driven so low that we had to beg for a cleaning job in the very mansion my father built. Our home turned into a living hell I endured every single day." Gasps of shock swept through the guests. They looked at Ava with sympathy and awe, while their disgust and fury aimed squarely at Jonathan only grew more palpable. Martha Sullivan, who'd mocked Ava moments before, quietly fell back into the crowd, her face pale with disbelief. Cynthia Evans, who'd sneered at Ava's dress, went ashen as if struck by a moral blow. Ava pressed on, her voice catching with emotion but still unwavering. "Every day I scrubbed these floors. I faced the memory of my father and the memories of the happiness Jonathan callously destroyed. He made me work in my own father's house to revel in his twisted victory and absolute power." Jonathan struggled to stand, his face drained of color, desperation leaking into his voice. "No, that's not. I never meant to, never meant to." Ava's eyes flashed with contempt, her words sharp as knives. "You forced my mother to slave away until her last breath, just so you could keep me in school. She died of illness and despair without even enough money for her medicine, all because of you, Jonathan." A stunned hush fell over the room, broken only by whispered expressions of outrage and betrayal. The atmosphere grew so heavy with revulsion that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. No one could believe that the polished, powerful man they once admired could be so monstrous. Emily collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, the trust she'd placed in Jonathan shattered like fragile glass. Around them, former friends and allies recoiled, as if Jonathan himself were a contagion they couldn't risk catching. Ava stepped forward again, her voice low yet commanding. "Jonathan, you've spent your life trampling others to climb to the top. But real strength doesn't come from cruelty and power. It comes from courage and justice, something you lost long ago." Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He glanced around, realizing at last that every eye in the room had turned away from him. Ava turned to face the assembled guests, her tone soft but resolute. I want everyone here tonight to understand that behind wealth and power, there can lie horrors beyond imagination. And justice is never too late, even when it takes 20 years to be served. Her words echoed through the grand hall, a powerful warning reverberating in every heart. From that moment on, none of the guests would ever look at Jonathan Bennett the same way again. In their eyes, he was no longer the elegant titan they'd admired, but a criminal laid bare by the light of truth. The atmosphere in the grand hall felt as if it had frozen solid under the weight of Ava's declaration. Jonathan Bennett sat motionless, as though everything inside him had collapsed. The guests around him kept their distance, their eyes full of disgust and fear, shoving him into utter isolation and despair. But Ava knew this wasn't enough. True justice required more than an accusation, she needed irrefutable proof. And now, before all of Beverly Hills high society, she would take the final, decisive step of the plan she'd spent 2 decades preparing. Ava lightly nodded toward the main doors. They swung open to reveal 2 figures every guest recognized, renowned investigative journalist Sarah Mitchell, sharp-minded and fearless, and celebrated attorney Alex Turner, famed for his integrity and his record of prosecuting powerful figures. Sarah Mitchell strode in, her cropped brown hair and steely gaze commanding immediate respect. Alex Turner followed, clutching a thick dossier. Together, they took their place beside Ava in the center of the room, facing Jonathan. Jonathan leapt to his feet in alarm, his voice trembling. What are you doing here?" Sarah said nothing to him. She studied him coolly, then turned to Ava, accepting a small remote control. Her voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, at the request of Ava Coleman Bennett, I and attorney Alex Turner are here today to present the definitive, comprehensive evidence of the serious financial crimes Jonathan Bennett has committed over the past 20 years. Sarah pressed a button. The large screen behind them lit up, displaying documents and images that left the audience stunned. Clear bank records appeared, showing Jonathan diverting millions of dollars from the Bennett Charity Fund and corporate accounts into his personal coffers. Her voice continued, each word as precise as a legal indictment. "These are bank statements proving Jonathan Bennett secretly transferred over $20 million from the Bennett Charitable Fund into his personal accounts. These transactions were masked by fabricated charitable disbursements that never existed." The guests went pale, unable to believe what they saw. Emily trembled, her tears flowing freely as she realized her husband, once above reproach, was a cold-blooded criminal and liar. Jonathan stammered, eyes wild, lunging toward Sarah as if to grab the remote. "Stop this. It's slander. You're making it all up." Alex Turner stepped forward, blocking him. His voice was firm and unyielding. "Mr. Bennett, I strongly advise you not to act rashly. All of this evidence is legal and has been fully verified by financial regulators and federal law enforcement." Jonathan staggered back, legs shaking. Sarah advanced, the presentation playing additional audio, Jonathan's own calm, chilling voice negotiating bribes to silence officials and cover up embezzlement and tax evasion. "If they want to stay quiet, just pay them. Don't let this leak or I'll lose everything." The guests recoiled in horror. Those who had once supported Jonathan hung their heads, ashamed to meet each other's eyes. Cynthia Evans and Martha Sullivan, the women who had ridiculed Ava, now glanced at one another in trembling disbelief. Sarah concluded her presentation with solemn resolve. "All of this evidence has been forwarded to the proper authorities. Jonathan Bennett will face multiple criminal charges, including embezzlement of charitable funds, bribery, tax fraud, and obstruction of justice." Ava stepped forward, her voice gentle yet unflinching. "Jonathan, you spent your life hiding behind lies and crime, believing power and money could shield you. But you were wrong. The truth always comes to light, no matter how deeply it's buried." Jonathan's eyes welled with tears, his voice choking. "Ava, please forgive me. I never meant for things to go this far." Ava's gaze hardened, her eyes blazing with the fire of justice. "Jonathan, you don't deserve forgiveness from me or anyone else. Everything that happened today is the result of your own choices, and I will never let justice be forgotten again." Jonathan slumped to the floor, utterly defeated. The guests looked at him with contempt and profound disappointment. In that moment, Jonathan Bennett's career, honor, and power evaporated. Ava's final blow had landed, and the full truth was finally laid bare. Ava's steadfast declaration rang like a death blow, snuffing out the last spark of hope in Jonathan's mind. In that moment, he completely lost control. His bloodshot eyes darted around the room like a wounded animal, desperate to escape the trap he himself had set. "Ava!" Jonathan's voice trembled, weak and desperate, stripped of all authority and power. "Please stop. I know I was wrong. You have everything you ever wanted." Ava met his gaze with a cold, sorrowful look at the broken man she'd once called brother. "Everything I wanted, Jonathan? All I ever wanted was justice, justice you robbed from my mother and me. And today, justice will not be denied by your belated pleas." Jonathan spun toward Emily, eyes begging for the last support from the wife he'd shared so many years with. But all he found was her pained, furious stare, eyes brimming with tears and hatred. She spoke in a quivering voice of anguish. "Jonathan, I spent my life trusting and supporting you, and now I discover I've lived alongside a murderer and a monster. You've turned my life, and our children's, into a monstrous lie." He lunged toward her, clutching her hand, voice choked with despair. "Emily, please try to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I only wanted to protect our family." Emily yanked her hand away as if he were a filthy thing. She stepped back, tears streaming down her anguish-filled face, her tone steely with resolve. "You have no right to speak of family, Jonathan. You destroyed everything we ever had. And right now, I'm calling the police. You must pay for the crimes you've committed." Emily's words sounded like the final bell, ending Jonathan's last hopes. He stood frozen, pleading with his eyes. But every wealthy guest who once fawned over him now turned their back, faces cold with contempt. Tension spiked as police sirens wailed outside. A squad of officers swept into the hall, led by Chief Samuel Hughes, famed for investigating Beverly Hills' most sensational crimes. "Jonathan Bennett," Chief Hughes announced in a firm, clear voice, "you are under arrest for the suspected murder of your father, Edward Bennett, embezzlement of charitable funds, bribery, and tax fraud. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say may be used against you in court." Panicked, Jonathan resisted, but officers quickly subdued him. The guests murmured and scrambled away, eager to distance themselves from the criminal spectacle unfolding before them. At that moment, the doors crashed open again, and a swarm of reporters flooded in, cameras and microphones thrust forward. Flashbulbs popped relentlessly, capturing Jonathan's despairing, defeated face, once an icon of power and wealth, now reduced to a pitiful figure in police custody. "Mr. Bennett, any comment on these charges of patricide and financial fraud?" a reporter shouted. Jonathan tried to hide his face, his lips quivered, but no words came. Reporters pressed him with questions as they broadcast the chaotic scene live. Guests hastily slipped out, unwilling to have their names tied to the largest scandal in Beverly Hills high society. Emily stood trembling in a corner, pain etched across her face, yet she held her head high and stared Jonathan down one final time. "I hope you spend the rest of your life reflecting on what you've done, Jonathan." Ava stood calmly as Jonathan was led away in utter humiliation. His steps faltered, strength drained, while cameras and microphones swarmed him, forcing him to confront the harshest truth of his life. When the great doors finally closed behind him, Ava felt a strange lightness in her chest. She knew she had kept her promise to her mother, secured justice for her father, and, most importantly, shattered forever the web of lies Jonathan used to manipulate everyone. Standing alone in the vast hall, Ava realized something profound. Jonathan had lost far more than freedom or money. He'd lost everything of true value, honor, love, and the respect of those dearest to him. That was the price he'd pay for his greed, cruelty, and terrible choices. Ava turned back to the remaining guests, her voice calm but powerful. "Remember this moment. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always prevail. And anyone who chooses to live in lies and injustice will one day face their own downfall, just as Jonathan Bennett has tonight. A hush fell over the grand hall, a solemn testament to the undeniable power of truth and justice. When the great doors closed behind Jonathan, the entire hall fell into a profound silence. Ava's eyes followed his retreating figure, and in her chest she felt a strange calm tempered by a weight of sorrow. In that moment, she understood that the victory she had just won was not a cause for celebration, but simply the restoration of justice to its rightful place, a place Jonathan had held for far too long. In the days that followed, the Jonathan Bennett case dominated headlines and national news broadcasts. The trial moved swiftly, yet was fraught with tension. Each piece of evidence laid bare shocked the public with the depth of Jonathan's cruelty, cunning, and cold-blooded greed. In the witness stand, his once arrogant facade fell away. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, utterly broken by the judgment of both the law and his own conscience. After fierce deliberations, the verdict was delivered under the watchful eye of millions of Americans. Jonathan Bennett was sentenced to life in prison for premeditated murder, large-scale financial fraud, bribery, and corruption. All of his illicit assets were seized by the government to compensate his victims, most notably Ava Coleman Bennett, who had borne the greatest losses and endured the deepest wounds over the past 2 decades. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Jonathan remained motionless in the defendant's chair, head bowed, shoulders trembling with helplessness. This was the final reckoning for the path he had chosen, a path paved with greed, deceit, and violence, now ending in the loss of everything he once held dear. In the aftermath, Emily Bennett filed for divorce and moved her children far from Beverly Hills. She vowed never again to utter the Bennett name, which had become for her a symbol of betrayal and pain. For her part, Ava received countless interview requests from major media outlets. Yet rather than hold a triumphant press conference, she opted for a small gathering at Alex Turner's law office, her steadfast ally throughout the pursuit of justice. Before the camera lenses, Ava appeared simply dressed yet radiantly composed. Her voice rang clear, each word resonating in the hearts of her listeners. "I want everyone to understand one thing. My motive was never revenge. The suffering my mother and I endured cannot be healed by inflicting the same pain on another." She paused, her eyes shining with quiet conviction. "What I have always sought is justice for 20 years, Jonathan Bennett believed that power and money could shield him from accountability. Today, he, and all of us, learned a vital lesson: no one stands above the truth." Reporters listened in respectful silence, captivated by the sincerity and strength in her words. Sarah Mitchell, the journalist who helped expose the truth, offered an admiring nod. Alex Turner stood proudly at her side, witnessing the woman's courageous fulfillment of her mission. Ava continued, her tone softer now but brimming with compassion and wisdom. "I hope my story serves as a reminder to us all: justice may arrive late, but it always arrives, even when buried beneath layers of lies. Jonathan Bennett is not the only one in our society to misuse power. But his downfall stands as proof that no one escapes the consequences of their actions." She looked directly into the camera, voice gentle yet resolute. "What I seek now is to rebuild what was lost, to help those still suffering injustice, and to show that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in the unwavering pursuit of justice." The interview ended amid unanimous respect from everyone present. Ava's humane, profound message spread rapidly, elevating her into a powerful symbol of resilience and dignity. Across the nation, people voiced deep admiration for the woman once underestimated, who rose up through nothing but the power of truth. That evening, alone in her quiet room, Ava gazed at a photograph of her parents on the desk. A gentle smile crossed her lips as she felt certain that at last, they could rest in peace. Their lives, and their suffering, would no longer be forgotten or in vain. And as dusk settled outside her window, Ava vowed that her fight for justice was only beginning. She would continue to live and act with courage, compassion, and honor, proving that even in the darkest times, truth and conscience can guide us back to where we belong. In the months following that tumultuous trial, Ava refused to rest or take solace in her victory. Instead, she immediately embarked on a new journey, determined to rebuild the Bennett Corporation from the ashes Jonathan had left behind. When Ava first stepped into Jonathan's old office at the company headquarters, the room where he once made those ruthless, ambitious decisions, she felt as though she'd entered an entirely alien world. Those four walls had borne witness to countless schemes, unchecked ambition, and lies. Now, they would witness a rebirth, one founded on entirely different core values. Ava convened a meeting with the senior leadership team, a mix of longtime Bennett executives and fresh, enthusiastic newcomers. In that meeting, her voice was calm yet authoritative as she declared, "From today forward, the Bennett Corporation will no longer stand for greed or blind power. We will rebuild from the ground up, and this time, our growth will be built on transparency, compassion, and social responsibility." The leadership team listened with deep respect, knowing she had fought tirelessly for truth. For any lingering skeptics, Ava offered not threats, but a new style of leadership, one that was both compassionate and decisive. She immediately launched a sweeping transformation unseen in Bennett's history. Fair wages and enhanced benefits were rolled out across the board, and the toxic culture of the past was replaced with one of support and respect. Ava spent hours each day listening to employees' concerns and aspirations, fostering an atmosphere of trust and unity. But she didn't stop there. She created major scholarship funds for workers' children, ensuring no child would suffer the same deprivation and injustice she once endured. She established community aid programs, funding startups and initiatives led by society's most vulnerable people, the very ones Jonathan had long ignored or actively marginalized. Every one of Ava's decisions was guided by ethics, something Jonathan had never valued. She believed that a truly great and sustainable company must be built on fairness, empathy, and social responsibility. In just 6 months, these policies yielded results beyond anyone's expectations. The Bennett Corporation not only recovered from its catastrophic scandal but also achieved record-breaking profits, surpassing the days when Jonathan was at the helm. Even more remarkable, this financial success came not from exploitation or oppression, but from the spirit of collaboration and trust that Ava had inspired. The media hailed Bennett as a model of corporate renewal. Business magazines put Ava Coleman Bennett on their covers, calling her the symbol of a new generation of leaders, ones who put people and justice above personal gain. At a celebration ceremony marking the company's achievements, Ava stood on stage before employees and partners who'd stood by her through the hardships. Her eyes shone with pride and hope as she addressed the crowd. "I want to thank each of you for believing in our journey. Today's success isn't mine alone, it's proof of the power of unity, compassion, and shared responsibility." In the audience, hundreds of faces looked up at her with admiration and unwavering trust. After years spent in the shadow of greed and power, they had found light in Ava's leadership. "I also want to remind you," she continued, her voice sincere, "that ethical values aren't optional, they're a responsibility each of us must carry. We've shown that a company can succeed without sacrificing conscience or integrity." Applause thundered through the hall, brimming with pride and emotion. No one in that room remembered Jonathan with fear or disdain anymore. They remembered that Ava had given them a future worth believing in. Looking out at her team, Ava felt as if she could see her parents in every employee's eyes, people who'd long suffered injustice now restored to their rightful place in society. She smiled softly, knowing that this was true victory, not the downfall of an enemy, but the restoration of fairness, compassion, and dignity. From the ruins Jonathan left behind, Ava had forged a brand new legacy, one built on resilience, honor, and empathy. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew she was on the right path. Ahead of her lay the enduring light of justice, humanity, and truth. In the months after that unforgettable victory at trial, Ava didn't allow herself a moment's rest or self-congratulation. Instead, she immediately embarked on a new mission, rebuilding the Bennett Corporation from the ruins Jonathan had left behind. When Ava first stepped into Jonathan's old office at headquarters, the room where he once made his ruthless, ambitious decisions, she felt as if she had entered a completely foreign world. Those four walls had witnessed intrigue, unchecked ambition, and lies. Now, they would witness a rebirth rooted in entirely different core values. She convened a meeting with the senior leadership team, some veterans who'd served under Jonathan, and some passionate newcomers. Calmly and authoritatively, she announced, "From today forward, Bennett Corporation will no longer stand for greed or blind power. We will rebuild from the ground up, this time guided by transparency, compassion, and social responsibility." Her team listened with deep respect, aware of the tireless struggle she'd waged for truth. For any lingering skeptics, Ava offered not threats, but a new style of leadership, nurturing yet decisive. She launched unprecedented reforms, fair wages and enhanced benefits rolled out company-wide, and the toxic culture of old was replaced by one of support and respect. Ava spent hours each day listening to employees' concerns and ideas, building an atmosphere of trust and unity. Beyond the office, she established major scholarship funds for workers' children so that no child would endure the deprivation she once faced. She also created community support programs, funding startups and initiatives for society's most vulnerable, people Jonathan had long ignored or actively marginalized. Every decision she made was guided by ethics, something Jonathan never valued. Ava believed a truly great and sustainable company must be built on fairness, empathy, and social responsibility. In just 6 months, these policies delivered results far beyond anyone's expectations. Bennett Corporation not only recovered from its scandal, but achieved record profits, surpassing even its peak under Jonathan. Remarkably, the success came not from exploitation or pressure, but from the spirit of collaboration and trust that Ava inspired. The media hailed Bennett as a model of corporate renewal. Business magazines put Ava Coleman Bennett on their covers, calling her the symbol of a new generation of leaders, those who put people and justice above personal gain. At a company celebration attended by employees and partners who'd stood by her, Ava took the stage, pride and hope shining in her eyes. "I want to thank all of you for believing in our journey. Today's success isn't mine alone, it's proof of the power of unity, compassion, and shared responsibility." In the audience, hundreds of faces looked up at her with admiration and unwavering trust. After years in the shadow of greed and power, they had found light in Ava's leadership. "I also want to remind you," she continued sincerely, "that ethical values aren't optional, they're a responsibility we all share. We've shown that a company can succeed without sacrificing conscience or integrity." Thunderous applause filled the hall, overflowing with pride and emotion. None of the guests remembered Jonathan with fear or contempt. They remembered that Ava had given them a future worth believing in. As she stood on the stage, Ava felt as if she could see her parents in every employee's eyes, the eyes of people who'd long suffered injustice, now restored to their rightful place in society. She smiled softly, knowing this was true victory, not vanquishing an enemy, but restoring fairness, compassion, and dignity. From the ashes Jonathan left behind, Ava had forged a brand new legacy, one built on resilience, honor, and empathy. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew she was on the right path. Ahead lay the enduring light of justice, humanity, and truth. After that memorable ceremony, Ava returned to her new home, a place where she chose to rebuild her life, free from the haunting memories of the past. This new space was nothing like the cold opulence of the old Bennett Manor. Instead, it was warm and simple, a home where love and kindness filled every corner. In the living room, the 2 orphaned children she'd recently adopted sat side by side doing homework, little Mia, with her soft curls and wide, curious eyes, and her older brother Ethan, always serious and thoughtful, as though he'd grown up too fast. When Ava entered, they both looked up, their faces lighting with joy and trust at the sight of their new mother. "Mom's home," Mia squealed, racing forward to hug Ava, while Ethan offered a gentle, grateful smile. Moments like these filled Ava's heart with warmth and peace. It was in these small moments that she realized her fight for justice wasn't just a personal mission, it was a purpose to create a better future for the next generation. Every evening, Ava spent time sharing her life story with Mia and Ethan, not to fuel anger or hatred, but to impart lessons of forgiveness, social justice, and each person's inner strength. She emphasized that compassion and forgiveness are humanity's greatest powers, stronger than any wealth or authority. A few months later, Ava received a letter from prison bearing the unmistakable handwriting of Jonathan Bennett. Holding the letter, her heart raced. The man who'd stolen her childhood and happiness was finally confronting the truth and the loneliness of his own choices. She opened it slowly. Inside, Jonathan's shaky handwriting conveyed his despair and remorse. Ava, I know I no longer deserve any forgiveness from you, but I want you to know that my days in prison have shown me the enormity of my mistakes. I don't expect you to forget the past, only to forgive me, so I can find some peace before the end. I deeply regret the pain I caused you and our mother. I sincerely hope you find the happiness I could never give you. Jonathan. Ava laid the letter on the table and gazed out the window, her eyes distant. She chose not to reply, not out of lingering hatred, but because she understood that her best path forward was not to dwell on the past, but to look toward the future. A future where good values would never again be buried by power or greed. The next day, Ava spoke at Mia and Nathan's school, facing hundreds of eager young faces. She shared her life journey with heartfelt simplicity. My dears, in life you may face injustice, hurt, even betrayal. But the most important thing isn't revenge or winning at all costs. True victory is when you refuse to let that pain turn you into someone like the one who harmed you. Her voice fell softer, drawing them in. It took me years to learn that the best way to overcome injustice is to create something good, to become the best version of yourself. You must learn to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because you deserve peace and happiness. The children listened, eyes shining with admiration and resolve. Ethan offered a proud smile, while Mia looked at her mother with teary wonder. Their faith in her was Ava's greatest motivation to continue her chosen path, one of justice and unconditional kindness. In the community, Ava quickly became a powerful symbol of resilience, compassion, and human dignity. She was often invited to speak at forums, universities, and social organizations. Her life story inspired countless people who'd suffered injustice, helping them find strength and hope. One peaceful afternoon, as she sat on the front steps watching Mia and Ethan play in the yard, Ava smiled inwardly, feeling a deep serenity she'd once thought unattainable. It was then she understood that the greatest legacy she could leave the next generation was compassion, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of goodness. Looking up at the clear blue sky, she whispered, as if sending a final message to her parents. Mom. Dad. I kept my promise. Not through revenge or bitterness, but by building a world where goodness is nurtured and protected, where justice is no longer a distant dream. And there, in the warm glow of late afternoon, Ava knew her journey had truly come full circle, and that a new journey, brimming with hope, lay just ahead. If this story inspired you and touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next meaningful tale. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.